Okay.
Welcome to the first episode of Infiltrated with George Neumayr. I am George Neumayr. I'm the author of The Political Pope, a senior editor at the American Spectator. And this is the first show. We're going to use this show, first of all, to draw attention to the infiltration of the Catholic Church by heretics, by leftists, by communists, by apostates, by charlatans, by creeps. This has, of course, been going on for quite some time in the Catholic Church, but very few people talk about it directly and openly, and we're going to do that on this show. We are going to use this program, this podcast, as an instrument of change within the Catholic Church. We are going to use this program to drive out of the church all of these charlatans and frauds and degenerates and heretics who have ruined the Catholic Church, who have marred the Church of Jesus Christ, who have treated the church like their personal fiefdom. We will not tolerate that. We are lay people. We are priests. Today on this show, we are lucky to have Father James Altman, one of the great priests in this country, who was canceled by his bishop. He's perhaps the most famous canceled priest in the world. We're also joined by the producer of this podcast, Jim Maughan, who came up with this idea. He said, Jim said to me, "Why don't we have Father Altman on for this debut podcast?" And that was a great idea. Jim is a former Wall Street trader. He was the director of trading for BB&T Markets. He's also a Catholic activist, and he's going to be the producer of this podcast. Thank you, Father Altman, for being here. Let's just jump into this immediately. We're going to talk about this scandal involving Bishop Nestout, Bishop Barry Knestout in Richmond, Virginia. And the scandal very precisely is this. Barry Knestout is the incoming chairman of the USCCB's, the United States Catholic Bishops' Committee for the Protection of Children and Young People. Now, that is outrageous. It is outrageous that he is the chairman of this group for two reasons. One reason, he is a protege of Theodore McCarrick, who is one of the worst predators in the history of the Catholic Church. Nestout was the confidential private secretary for McCarrick for at least 2 years. In that capacity, he arranged appointments. He was the appointment secretary for McCarrick, which means he was arranging grooming sessions for McCarrick. He also, we believe, lived with McCarrick for a little while. And he also, we know that at the time of his installation as Bishop of Richmond, he incorporated into his ecclesiastical coat of arms a tribute to Theodore McCarrick. He used an element of Theodore McCarrick's coat of arms in his coat of arms, a golden lion. You can look this up. So at any rate, that's one reason why it's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous that he is the chairman of that bishop's committee against abuse. The second reason is something that I discovered as a reporter, which is I got a tip. Somebody told me that Nestout has, he was protecting a problem priest in the Diocese of Richmond. And this person directed me to an article from 2003 in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, which showed that a Father Wayne Ball had committed a public sexual offense. He was caught in a public park in Richmond, I think a few days before Thanksgiving in 2003. He was caught in a parked car, having sex with another man, and he was nabbed by police. It must have been a pretty serious matter for the police to go to the trouble of arresting him, and they brought him down, I guess, and he finally had to admit that, yes, he went to that park to have sex with a man in a parked car in a place where kids could have been. And so he ended up entering a plea agreement, a guilty plea agreement with the state, in which he confessed to pursuing lewdness in a bawdy place. It's an antiquated law, and he admitted that he broke that law. And as a consequence of that, he was kicked out of the parish where he then served, Our Lady of Lourdes, I believe. The parishioners caught wind of this, and they said they went to Walter Sullivan, the bishop at the time, and they said, "We want this guy gone. We were appalled by his conduct. We don't want to be served by a priest who's having sex with some guy in a parked car in a park in Richmond where kids could be playing." And so he was removed from that position. He's a canon lawyer, believe it or not, and he ended up working on the canon law tribunal as a judge with a public sexual offense on his record, or at least a guilty plea agreement with the state, because part of the agreement was actually, the judge said to him, if you if you don't do this again for 6 months, I will expunge your record. Well, so that happened. His record was expunged, but it didn't expunge the fact that he entered into a guilty plea agreement with the state in which he confessed to a homosexual tryst in a public place, in a public park where kids could have been playing. So, right there, you see there's a willingness to corrupt children. And who can trust a priest who behaves like this way? So at any rate, Nestout takes this guy in 2018, knowing full well about this record. He makes Wayne Ball the pastor of St. Augustine Parish in Richmond. He makes him the pastor. And then he doesn't tell the congregation about Ball's record. He leaves them in the dark. And I know this for a fact because I called up Ball myself and I asked him point blank, did you or Bishop Nestout tell the congregation? Ball said no. He said he didn't have to. The judge had cleared his record. And I said, that's beside the point. The fact is you confessed to having had sex in a parked car in a public place, a park where kids could have been playing. And you confessed that you did that. And then he went off to rehab. It went to some deviant rehab, a rehab center for deviants. And then he came back, and I guess he was a canon lawyer for a judge on the canon law tribunal. But at any rate, the fact is that Nestout did this, made this absolutely appalling and preposterous personnel move where he takes a sexual deviant and makes him the pastor, and then doesn't even ask the congregation if they can sign off on that. So that's really the nature of the scandal. I've been covering it. On Saturday, after many days of trying to get Nestout on the phone and being stonewalled by his communications people, I finally took matters into my own hands. I decided to go over to the rectory of Bishop Nestout and I rang the doorbell. And who should come down and open the door but Bishop Nestout? And I said, Bishop, can I talk to you for a second? And he said in a very pathetic voice, what about? He knew perfectly why I was there. And I said, I want to ask you about your appointment of Father Wayne Ball to the pastorship of St. Augustine's Parish without bothering to inform the parishioners there of his public sexual offense. And he just completely shut down and mumbled something about how I should talk to his communications people, the very communications people that have been stonewalling me for a week and telling me that I couldn't talk to Nestout. And then it all ends with, I said, you're not going to answer this question. It's a legitimate question. And I said, why would you do this? Why would you do this? He wouldn't answer the question. And now he's running scared. He closed the door in my face. The next day, in retaliation for that interview, he ordered me banned from the cathedral for life. He called the police. And,
really?
Yeah, he issued a barring order against me. I'm the Pete Rose of Catholic journalists, apparently. I'm never going to be able to go to the cathedral again unless a new bishop comes in and suspends or lifts that order. But it's outrageous. It's a total violation of the canon law, my canonical rights, even my civil rights as a journalist. I mean, this is absurd. But the reason we're having you on, Father Altman, is I want you to just speak to this. Do you, I assume, you join Father Kalchik, who's the only other priest I know of who's called for the resignation of Nestout from this committee. I assume you agree with Father Kalchik that Nestout should resign from this committee today.
Oh, he should resign specifically from that committee. With regard to Barry Knestout, I could give you a handful of reasons why he shouldn't even be a bishop, why he should be laicized. Yeah. Just with what he did to you, what kind of petty tyrants do these people think they are? That Barry Knestout can the next day issue a ban from you being at the cathedral. How dare he even think he can do such a thing? That foul viper should resign today or be kicked out. But, I'm not holding my breath waiting for any other bishop to stand up and say, Nestout, you're evil. You can't do that. The very fact that you think you can do something like that demonstrates an absolute absence of pastoral care and charity.
And it's also an example of what Pope Francis has called self-interested clericalism. Yeah. These guys, as you know, they treat their diocese like their personal fiefdom.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And you see, that's what the synod and synodality is doing. It's splintering the Catholic Church. Instead of being one church, it's splintering them into, I think it's about 3,800 dioceses around the world, where each one is now a new little Protestant denomination, which follows what the bishop of the diocese says. And they're going to be able to do what this guy, Barry Nestout, thinks he can do. He cannot do that. he is, by doing such a thing, he has so violated his calling to be a bishop that he should be thrown out. Bergoglio should be over here throwing him out right now.
Yeah, and he's obviously a heretic because he promotes the heresy of James Martin, who completely rejects the church's teaching on the sinfulness of homosexual acts.
Right.
So you're in faith. So you would call, along with Father Kalchek, you're calling for the bishops to tell Barry Knestout that he must resign from that committee as the chairman of the bishops' committee on the protection of young people and children. Sure. And then also that committee, by the way, I've been told, is going to address the issue of the abuse of vulnerable adults. And, who is a vulnerable adult? Well, Wilton Gregory probably would say, well, a deaf person or a disabled person. But another bishop might say, well, a vulnerable adult is a 41-year-old man who goes to a gay cruising park in Richmond and has a sexual compulsion and is then exploited by a Catholic priest who, instead of ministering to the man, has sex with the man. And that could be a vulnerable adult. So Barry Knestout has promoted to pastor somebody who's exploited a vulnerable adult. Now, I'm going to turn to Jim for a second because I think Jim is equally outraged. You speak as a layperson, Jim, and I want to ask you, should Catholics give a penny to a church that operates like this?
I was listening to you guys. I was trying to find that video, by the way, of you at the front door. It's very powerful. We'll play it for you guys in a few minutes, but I will echo the sentiments that I've heard from Father Altman many, many times. Not one dime. And what I'm saying is these guys are running to reiterate what you guys are talking about, they're running their own little fiefdom here. It's the most fascinating institution I have ever seen. They, on the one hand, they have been poorly catechizing the Catholic community in the United States now for 50 years. You ask your average Catholic any serious point about the deposit of faith, they've absolutely no idea what's going on, as evidenced by 70% don't believe in the real presence. But what I'm really saying is what they did make sure that everybody got was this subject of obedience. And they wheeled that thing out there whenever it's convenient. And frankly, the only thing I can think of is quite honestly, is they're acting like a bunch of teenage girls. And whenever they get roughly uncomfortable, they freak out and they go into hiding. And so the point is now, on the one hand, not one more dime. On the other hand, not to get off track, but a very suspicious thing's been going on. If you notice, particularly Catholic Charities, these other guys, they're getting a lot of money from these guys. So it almost seems to me that it's obvious we shouldn't give them one more dime, but it almost seems to me this is part of their plan. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, this is the this is the euthanasia program that they've got for the Catholic Church. They're trying to kill the faith. They want to keep the buildings, they want to keep the money, but they want to kill the faith. They want to separate the faith from the people. And what we want to tell you, those of you who are watching who might be inclined to call the USCCB and complain, or the Diocese of Richmond, what I think you should say, if you call, and it'll take 2 minutes out of your life to do this, call them up and say, I will not give a penny to the Catholic Church until the U.S. bishops remove Barry Knestout from their committee on the protection of children. And so you can say that to the Diocese of Richmond too. I will not give a penny to the Diocese of Richmond until Barry Knestout admits that he behaved very badly in terms of promoting Wayne Ball. They should also call for the resignation. Wayne Ball should not be the pastor of that parish. He should resign from that position today. And the folks should call the Diocese of Richmond and say, I will not give a penny to the Diocese of Richmond until Nestout apologizes and changes his ways and Wayne Ball resigns. Now, I, of course, agree with Father Altman that Barry Knestout has no business being a priest, much less a bishop, because he's so obviously a heretic. He promotes the heresy of James Martin. He wanted an Episcopalian priestess to be ordained and consecrated in his cathedral, I believe, or one of the churches in Richmond. That actually fell through. It didn't end up happening, but it was something that Nestout wanted to happen. And we haven't even gotten into the fact that Nestout is a former henchman for Cardinal Donald Wuerl. He was the Vicar General for Donald Wuerl. And in that position, he would have known that the Vatican had restrictions on McCarrick, albeit feeble restrictions, but he would have known that the Vatican issued restrictions against McCarrick. And so Nestout is lying through his teeth when he said he didn't know about McCarrick's predation. Of course he did. There was an article from Richard Sipe, a letter floating around the internet for at least a decade, which Nestout, unless he has no computer skills, would have seen. And, so he's been lying from the get-go about all this. And the point I tried to make when I confronted him on Saturday was, you are presenting yourself, you're posturing as a reformer, and yet your record is one of concealment. You run interference for perverts and deviants. You ran interference for McCarrick. You protected and promoted this public sexual offender, Father Wayne Ball. And there's a lot of things I could say about Wayne Ball. That's a very interesting story. He's an interesting story in himself. One quick fact about him is, do you remember the Virginia governor, Robert McDonald, the former Republican governor, who was up on federal corruption charges? He was a subject of a federal corruption trial. Well, do you know who he was living with while the trial was going on, Father Altman?
No, I don't know.
He was living at the rectory of Father Wayne Ball. So you have a corrupt politician living with a corrupt priest in the priest rectory, which, by the way, is a violation of diocesan rules. Pastors are not supposed to have lay people living in their rectory. So Nestout, or his predecessor, I don't think he had been installed at that point, but the predecessor must have signed off on this horrible arrangement. We don't even know what the nature of the friendship is, but that's a weird story.
One might guess. I don't know anything.
Sure,
about
at the very least, it raises questions because McDonald had divorced his wife. He was in a post-divorce condition, let's say, and it's possible that he and Ball were boon companions of some kind. They may not have had a relationship, and we're not saying that because I have no proof to that effect. But I know that people are asking questions about this weird arrangement. Why was Robert McDonald living with Father Ball during his federal corruption trial? And this should interest secular reporters. Secular reporters love to report on wayward Republican politicians or Republican politicians who behave in an odd manner, and this certainly falls into that category. Of course, nobody has shown any interest so far, both secular or even our friends, with the exception of Church Militant and Matt Gaspers at Catholic Family News, Janet Baker, and very few people have taken an interest. Oh, John Zamirak at the Stream did a good column yesterday or the day before on this, yesterday, I believe. And he really ripped into Nestout and Ball and made a joke about Ball is Father Parking Lot. What is a little gay sex at a parking lot between friends? I think that was the title of John's. Excuse me. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Oh, I was going to say, I think I figured out how to get that video. If you want me to play it, you give me the word.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, hang on a second, and hopefully this works. Let's see. You guys seeing that?
Nope.
No.
Oh, bummer. Hold on.
Okay.
There we go.
Well, we can keep talking about this scandal has received very skimpy coverage. And it's very disappointing that our friends on the so-called Catholic right have taken zero interest in this. If they did take an interest in it, that would put a great deal of pressure on the bishops to force Nestout out of that committee. Sure. But it's really disappointing that the soft Catholic right applies almost no pressure to the bad guys. And it makes you think that some of these people are controlled resistance, that they're actually working for the bad guys. In fact, Nestout, I know for a fact, had a policy of cultivating conservative priests in the seminary and as Vicar General and as secretary to McCarrick. He was very nice to conservative priests because he knew that at some point he would need their defense. And that point and that moment has arrived. And now they are defending him. I've heard from a few of these guys who say, "Oh, he's not so bad."
Nestout.
No,
he is bad.
He is bad. He is.
Oh, I agree.
An enabler of
Mark White. What he tried to do to Father Mark White.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. That Father Mark White, that Barry Knestout has tried to laicize Father Mark White for nothing more than running a blog rightly critical, properly critical of the McCarrick culture of corruption that Knestout was clearly part of. Right. And so absurdly, Knestout tried to have Father White laicized. Apparently that case is in limbo and he hasn't succeeded. And hopefully this controversy will make it impossible for him to succeed. But that is another example of what you're talking about, which is this is a like so many, like your bishop in Father, this is a bishop who persecutes the Orthodox and promotes perverts and heretics.
Well, Monsignor Grinder is a perfect example. You talk about this guy, because here's what Nestout can say is the same thing my bishop said, Callahan said. Well, he didn't do anything illegal, except you can't even do that in Nestout's case because it was a crime what that guy did. So, that's the justification Callahan gave for putting Monsignor Grinder as pastor of a parish about 12 miles away from my parish.
Right.
Is that, well, he didn't do anything illegal.
And this is the same priest who was on Grindr every day for 3 years. So this is a priest who is just insanely immoral. He has no business being a priest. He should have been laicized the moment that this story broke. And yet your bishop is given this jerk, this degenerate jerk and heretic probably, a pastorship. And Nestout did the same thing with Wayne Ball. I went to Wayne Ball's blog and his Twitter account. And who does he retweet? He retweets James Martin.
Oh, of course.
He follows Barack Obama. What I've seen is that he's kind of a liberal Republican. He actually follows all these drippy, boring Bill Kristol types, who hate the Republican Party. So he's like, he and McDonald, I guess, probably share an antipathy for conservative Republicans or something. McDonald was incorrectly described as a conservative Republican. People who know McDonald tell me that he's just a creep of the first order. One guy told me he went out to dinner with him and he thought, and I said, what is up with, or he's like, what's up with McDonald? Is he a bisexual or like, what the hell is going on with this guy? So anyway, I wanted to get back to Father though. I know that didn't Nestout try to block you, Father, from coming to Richmond diocese?
Well, it was, yes. I'm glad you asked. So a family friend of mine is, the son is at Lynchburg at Liberty University. And I went out to visit him on his birthday and had a nice visit. He had asked if I would talk to some of the Catholic students that were there, because I'd been out there once before a few months earlier. I think it was roughly the time frame. And we're sitting right in the middle of a big classroom area, like a big building with classrooms in it. And they have all these public spaces with various chunks of chairs sitting around. And we're sitting around, and eventually there were 11 of us all talking about our Catholic faith. Well, so then he'd asked, well, could I come and be the guest at, they call it Catholic something ministry, Catholic campus ministry. That's it. Catholic campus ministry. And so, okay, it was around the same time. Well, lo and behold, then the girl, a young woman who is the head of it, said, well, I work for Barry Knestout. And so I checked with the diocese, and they forbid you to be present at this Catholic campus ministry. And furthermore, and this was the key line, furthermore, it is inappropriate for Father Altman to be on Liberty's campus. Liberty is a Protestant institution.
Yeah. That's Jerry Falwell, right? Or something?
Yeah, it was. And it's really, I was walking through it at 11:30 at night after this big meeting with these 11 people. And over the night, various other people joined in. And I hear this praise and worship music coming across the loudspeakers. I mean, the place is phenomenal. It's steeped in Christianity. Well, so then they say that about that. And I'm thinking, and then the funny part is about 2 weeks later, I was supposed to go to Liberty University and be one of the guests at this forum on religious liberty. He invited me to go out to that forum. But there's Nestout saying in his office saying, why it's inappropriate for me to be on their campus. Excuse me, Nestout. See how what petty little tyrants they are?
And this speaks to the clericalism, the shameless clericalism of Nestout. He treats the diocese like his personal fiefdom.
Right. And look what he did to you. He says, that cathedral is not his. It is God's cathedral. He's a steward of it. And any Catholic can go. You know, that happened down in Peoria when they wouldn't let 650 people go into any of the churches in the diocese to pray the rosary.
Yeah.
These SOBs. I can't.
On Saturday, I guess it was Sunday. This woman who works for Nestout, she said, "This is Nestout's property." I said, "No, it's God's property. It's Jesus Christ's property. Exactly. I'm a Catholic. You work for, and by the way, you work for me. We pay their salaries. We the faithful."
I know.
And you know how much money, Father and Jim, that these folks make. I found out that, for example, the communications director for Donald Wuerl, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, he was making $230,000 before benefits. That's so benefits on top of $230,000. So if that's the norm, then, a lot of these folks that we're talking about and dealing with, they're all making over $200,000 at least. And we're paying for that. Yeah, stupid diocesan appeals where we're giving money to everybody under the sun except the Orthodox.
Yes.
That makes it possible for these people to pull down $230,000 salaries. Wow. And the whole job of a communications chief in a bad and a corrupt diocese is not to communicate with the faithful. It's to block the faithful.
That's a great point. Hey guys, can I jump in on something you were talking about a few seconds ago? You had asked about, the view from the average layperson. One of the things when you were going through the litany, as we're talking about priests, there's one thing we can't lose sight of. There's guys like Father Altman. There's guys like Father Kalchek. There's guys like Father Frank Pavone, right? There's guys like Cardinal Zen who go to the Vatican, right? All of these good men are getting tortured. And I'm not overstating it. And so the point is, the laity at this point is quite literally, excuse me, shaking their head. They're going, and they've done such a poor job of really sort of teaching people about the faith that, unfortunately, a lot of it's going under the radar. And this is happening right before our eyes. These guys walk around, Monsignor Grinder, Father James Martin, with no pushback whatsoever.
And this is not, and the point to make here is that this is not the Catholic Church. This is the sect of Barry Knestout and his heretical and sleazy friends. This is not Catholicism. Right. They have departed from the faith. Yeah, they have the buildings. As St. Athanasius would say, they have the buildings. We have the faith. Yes. We have not left the faith. They have. And we're not going to let these charlatans destroy Jesus Christ's church, period.
That actually is exactly right. They have the buildings. They don't have the faith. They are charlatans. And even as you were speaking, it kept coming to my mind the whole bit about they widen their phylacteries. That's what they do. And they are so evil. But it's why, we all know the Venerable Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen. He said way back in 1972, who's going to save our church? Not our bishops, not our priests and religious. It's up to you, the people. That famous quote that he gave. And this is where we stand today. Bishop Sheen knew 70 years ago, he knew the corruption in the church and the evil that was taking place. It was way back then. And it's only gotten worse to the point where these bishops like Nestout, and by the way, I have to say, George, that everything you've just said, the bishops already knew about when in November they voted for him to be in that position. Well, so the idea that the bishops are going to stand up and tell Nestout, hey,
well, and that's a good point, that the very fact that his name was on the ballot.
Yeah, for that office.
It speaks to the corruption within the USCCB, because he must have gone to Gomez or Vigneron or one of those guys in the outgoing leadership and said, I want my name on the ballot. And why did Nestout want his name on the ballot? Because he wants to erase his association with McCarrick. He wanted to be able to say, hey, look, I'm running the committee to protect children. I'm doing a great job, and I'm spearheading all these efforts to protect children. Make me the Archbishop of Boston, Pope Francis. That was his goal. He was using this to try and rise higher in the church. And that's why I decided to take action against him. I did not want him to become the Archbishop of DC or Boston or Atlanta or any. He's angling for a bigger see. Richmond is a diocese. It's not an archdiocese. He wants to be an archbishop. He probably wants to be a cardinal. And I was determined to prevent that from happening. And I hope that even now, with the reporting I've done on his promotion of the sexual, a public sexual offender like Ball, that Francis would think twice before promoting him. But also to go back to what you mentioned, Father, about the USCCB vote, it's important to keep in mind that Nestout is obviously unqualified to head up that committee. The guy who came in second is also unqualified to head up the committee. Lorenzo, the Benedictine Lorenzo from Newark, who ran interference for Rembrandt Weekland. He's the guy who said that Rembrandt Weekland should be able to move into a Benedictine boarding school over the objections of parents. And so the guy who came in second in the race with Nestout, the guy who got like 8 votes less than Nestout, that guy's a bad, he's part of the dubious group within the church too. He's another guy he's another enabler of the gay mafia. He was an apologist for his fellow Benedictine Rembrandt Weekland. So we don't want to knock out Nestout and have that guy become the chairman. So what my message to the U.S. bishops, if you're listening, is do not make Lorenzo the chairman of that committee. What you should do, if you have any sense at all, is to allow the existing chairman, Bishop Johnston, to continue in that position until you figure out what to do. Now, there's another issue we need to discuss, and this really resonates with the people, with ordinary Catholics, which is the Nestout promotion of Father Ball speaks to this horrible double standard that the bishops have not addressed since the eruption of the McCarrick scandal. Since that scandal broke, the bishops have engaged in what I would call the appearance of reform, but not the reality of reform. Let's go to a specific example of that. Wayne Ball, a public sex offender. Now, if Wayne Ball was a layperson applying for even a volunteer position within the Catholic Church, he would have to go through a background check. He'd have to go through a Virtus background check. And he'd have to say, in 2003, I entered a plea agreement with the state admitting that I had a homosexual tryst in a park where kids play. Anybody with any sense would see that and say, you can't teach CCD, you can't be a volunteer, you can't do anything. So if he was a layperson, he wouldn't be able to work in the church. But as a priest, he's a priest and he gets a pastorship. He's promoted to a pastorship. And what does that tell you? It tells you that the background check for priests and bishops is weaker, less strenuous than the background check for church volunteers even. And this is outrageous. And it's something that the U.S. bishops have to address at their June session this year and change. Priests and bishops should be held not to a lower background check standard, but to a higher one.
George, can I ask you a question? I just to clarify something. So if I'm not mistaken, this position by Nestout is to be child protection, right?
Yeah, and youth protection, teenage protection, and vulnerable adult protection.
And vulnerable adult. And so you actually got Father Ball on the phone, and what made him hang up? What was your question?
Well, I didn't, at the time, I was curious. Like I said, give me details on the tryst. Who was it? Who are you with? What was his age? What were you doing? And of course, he didn't want to answer any of that. And I said to him, I insinuated, I guess I said, he actually very defiantly said and angrily said, well, I've never, it's not an underage situation. I said, well, I never said it was, but the fact is you're having sex in a park where kids could be playing. You were so out of control. You're having sex in a parked car with some dude. You could have exposed yourself to children. And of course he hangs he's getting very upset. He hangs the phone up. He then calls his lawyer and tells his lawyer, and interestingly enough, he's got a lawyer, like a very powerful, high-powered attorney on retainer at a moment's notice. This guy contacted me within 2 minutes, a John Brainley, something like that. I'm probably getting the name wrong, but he calls me up to clearly intimidate me out of doing my story. And then I I Google him, and who is this guy? He's the former attorney for Robert McDonald from the federal corruption trial. So Robert McDonald, former Virginia governor, and Wayne Ball share the same attorney. Now let's think about this for a second. If Wayne Ball is clean, if he hasn't committed any offenses since 2003, why would he need such a high-powered attorney on retainer at a moment's notice to call up a journalist like me and try to scare me off a story? Why would he need that? He's obviously not rehabilitated. And, you know, the idea that he did this once is a complete and total joke. He's probably done it.
That is, by the way, I was going to say that. Oh,
Yeah.
The fact that he did that in that car that day, it's not an isolated incident. And that's not even being mean-spirited. It's simply stating the fact.
You have to be pretty out of control, and you have to be under a homosexual compulsion to have sex in a park where kids could be playing with another guy. That's the bottom line. And here's another thing for the bishops who might be listening. Why in the world would you not laicize somebody like this? You're laicizing people for minor offenses like Mark White and Father Pavone because he's, pops off too much. But you won't laicize a guy like this who has sex in a public park where kids might be playing. You don't laicize a guy like that. Why don't you laicize a guy like that? And this raises another issue, which I tried to pursue with Wilton Gregory, which is how many right now, how many priests in active ministry have on their record public sex offenses similar to Father Ball's? I would like to get the number on that. And I'm sure the number is astounding. In fact, a church insider said to me that a bishop once said to him very cynically, if we got rid of all the homosexual deviants and all the womanizing heterosexual priests, he said we wouldn't have a team to field.
Wow.
And that's the view. So go ahead, speak to that.
George, my question was, don't you think too that the guy has this high-powered attorney on speed dial? What I'm suggesting is this indicates a systemic defense system already in place.
Yeah, it suggests to me that he's up to no good. It also raises the question, who's paying his legal fees? Are the faithful paying his legal fees, or is he paying out of his own pocket? How does a guy like this afford an attorney out of his own pocket? And I learned another thing, Father, and you can speak to this because you probably know the rules better than I do. I went over to his parish because I wanted to talk to some of his parishioners, and I wanted to track him down too. And I talked to this Korean woman, and she says to me, he doesn't even live there. That Ball doesn't even live at his own parish. What does that tell you? That's not a good sign.
Yeah.
This is what she said to me. I don't know if it's fact, but this is what she said to me. She said, Ball doesn't live here.
Yeah.
But speak to that, Father.
Sure. Most dioceses, it always was the case that the priest lived right next to the church so that people would have access to them in their time of need. That is, in fact, why a priest can't get married, because the parish is his family. And he's supposed to be a father to them in their time of need, their spiritual need, their temporal need as they lay dying. So I remember there was a diocese, I think it was in Omaha, where they said, no, we don't want the priest next there so the people aren't bugging them. We want them to live miles away in a house. I'm thinking, that's not what the priesthood is. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what the rules are for that diocese. I think in my own diocese, you do live in a rectory that is right next to the parish. So people know where you are, can have access to you, as they should. They are, after all.
And so, Father, if Ball said to Nestout, I want this semi-distressed bilingual parish, but I don't want to actually live there because I want to live in a posh area, not in a distressed area. What motivation? What do you think the motivation for a person like a guy with Ball's record? Why would he want to be at a semi-distressed parish with a lot of vulnerable teenagers?
Oh gosh, I wasn't even putting those connecting.
I mean, this is pure speculation. I have no evidence, but I find it very odd that Ball, a judge on the Canon Law Tribunal, a guy who knows big people like McDonald, got Virginia, lives with a former Virginia governor. He suddenly wants the pastorship of a semi-distressed bilingual parish that he doesn't want to live at. What is that about? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not saying anything definitively here. I'm just saying I'm raising the issue. Why would a guy like that want to be at that parish?
Well, I'm going to try to answer that question as pure speculation, because of course I don't know any of the facts. But the point is, if you're living next to the parish, parishioners see you coming and going at any time of day. There's cameras all around as well. But if you choose a parish, if you actually sought out that parish where you knew you did not have to live there, that gave you the freedom of being somewhere else where you can come and go and do as you please without oversight. So
Sure. Yeah.
It makes sense to me. Here's what I don't get though, George. If that's his MO, if that's what he wants to do, why be a priest at all? Why does he still want to be? Why does he want to go around saying, well, I'm the pastor of any church?
Great
Because that constrains his natural abilities to do whatever he wants to do, except now he's got this house somewhere far away. But why pretend to be a priest like that when that's not really what you want to do? Why? It's all because they want to widen their phylacteries. That has to be it. It's so nonsensical to me that the priests wouldn't feed their families. That's how I rip on all the bishops in our day when they lock the churches on us, which they are not allowed to do, period. We must obey God rather than men. So
how many like pastors say you think are in the same category as Ball, that they've got like a public sexual offense in their record that their congregation has never been informed about?
Sure.
Like, do you think this is happening across the country? I assume it is. And that's why the bishops are loath to confront Nestout here, because maybe a lot of them are doing the same thing.
Yeah. Well, when each state attorney general had to go and is now doing their due diligence and inspect, I wish they'd do it to the school system, but they're picking on the Catholic Church. But when they went and they looked at all the books of who has any record whatsoever, as it did in La Crosse, I think there were 28 or 29 out of 1,200 and something dating back to the 1800s that have a public record. So this kind of stuff is in fact known. If the state attorney general would put them on the chopping block where they had to release the data and the information, every bishop in Wisconsin has done so. So we know now, and we know in La Crosse diocese, the last abuser died here a few years ago, and then the only person that would be living that still has a public record is, or at least a record that is known to the public and not for criminal purposes, is, because he didn't do anything illegal, is Monsignor Grinder. So
that exactly right there. That right, what you just said is what Nestout will ultimately say if he has to address this issue, which is he'll say, this did not involve children.
Right.
Well, BS, it did involve children insofar as Ball did this in a public park where children play.
Yeah.
Do we really have to explain this to these guys?
Right.
Do they have any moral sense whatsoever? I mean, how is it that the standards of the Catholic Church should be lower than those of the world?
Okay, can I answer that, George? Do you remember when Jorge Bergoglio said, "Who am I to judge?"
Yeah.
About this person who covered up or did these things that he should not be doing. Nestout's there. Look at his pedigree. Look at his background, and he's saying, "How can I judge Ball?"
Right.
My background.
Right. Yeah. And his capacity to overlook the degeneracy of McCarrick led him to overlook the degeneracy of Wayne Ball.
Oh yeah, Wayne Ball's small potatoes compared to what he's been involved in the past.
Yeah, I mean, he as appointment secretary for McCarrick, Nestout would have in effect been setting up grooming sessions for a rapist. And he would have known, come on, cut the crap, Nestout. You knew Bishop Steve Lopez, go back and look at the record. Bishop Steve Lopez, a colleague, a peer of Nestout, has said, quote, "We all knew," unquote. We all knew.
Oh, they all knew. Jorge Bergoglio knew.
Yeah, of course he knew.
In 2004.
Vigano said he knew. Vigano said directly to the Pope, McCarrick's a rapist, an abuser of seminarians. And the Pope pretended probably not to hear him, but he heard him. He knew that.
Yeah. They knew full well. They were all part of the St. Galen's Mafia that they brag about. That Bergoglio knew when he put McCarrick back in power in 2013. He knew full well. And for that reason alone, he should be laicized. Bergoglio should be laicized just for McCarrick alone, to say nothing of the Pachamama and a whole list of other things. But
and also, as I've said before, and I think somebody else, would anybody trust, like if you had a nephew, you wanted catechized or a freshman in college, you wanted introduced to the faith. Would anybody entrust that person to Jorge Bergoglio?
Right, exactly. Or would
We don't even know.
Would a father bring his sons to that parish now in my diocese?
Yeah, we don't even know if like it's possible Bergoglio has the beliefs of a liberal Protestant. That's possible, I suppose. But, he sometimes talks in such a way that you wonder, like, does he even believe in he occasionally does say that he believes in God and Jesus Christ, but there's a hollowness to it. And he doesn't, he's subverting the faith in so many different areas.
Yes,
he is weakening, diluting the faith all over the place.
Intentionally.
Yeah, and intentionally. And he's leaving people in a state of doubt about certain things. He talked to that. Remember, he had those interviews with that famous atheistic guy, Eugenio Scalfari, the Italian journalist. Who was a flat-out apostate, a guy who renounced the Catholic faith. And the first thing that the Pope says to Scalfari is, "I don't want to convert you." And Scalfari says, "I've never been in the company of such an enlightened person before," or something like that. What this Pope is doing is he is not spreading the faith.
Right.
He is undermining the faith. He's basically telling people, don't believe, I don't even want you to believe in Catholicism.
Yeah.
I want you to stay an apostate.
Plurality of religions, don't you know? Which as I said, comes as a complete surprise to Jesus. Because when he was hanging on Calvary, he was thinking he was dying for the one faith, and that was his prayer at the Last Supper. Let us all be one. Our Father sent Jesus to establish the one faith that he wills everyone to belong to. We just don't follow his will. And neither does
if you put the Nicene Creed up for a secret vote at the USCCB meeting, it wouldn't pass.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Sadly, but true.
But I think this issue, actually, the double standard issue, that lay people are actually held to a higher standard than bishops and priests, that's a very resonant issue. That angers a lot of people.
Yeah.
You also have this issue where the bishops think that, if misconduct is adult, then we can accept it. No, you can't. You should laicize these guys, especially in today's climate. I mean, do we really have to explain this to these people?
Yeah,
and they're laicizing Mark White, or trying to laicize Mark White and Pavone and all these people for basically not conforming to the party line of the sect of Jorge Bergoglio. That's basically their crime. Yeah. So these guys are using canon law as a form of weaponization against their ideological opponents within the church. Right. It's ridiculous. They're going after people who actually believe the faith, while they themselves don't clearly reject parts of the faith, at least. Mm-hmm. And that's outrageous. But then, but this issue, we can accept adult misbehavior, and if it's just adult, well, that's not a big deal. No, it's a big deal. And we're not going to and bishops, we are not going to give you a penny if you maintain this charade of the appearance of reform without the reality of reform. We will not give the church a penny.
Yeah. You know what the problem, I think, is, George, is Jorge Bergoglio does want to splinter the church into a million pieces. He wants to destroy the church. And years ago, a cardinal said, there's a de facto schism in the church. And now we're seeing the catalysts for it to become in the open, the schism. And it's not you and me and Jim that are schismatics. It's Jorge Bergoglio and his ilk. Huh. And they don't care that it's being dramatically schismed. That's their goal, because they want to destroy it so that they can be, their 3,800 boys club. I call them sorority sisters because they act like it. That's what they want.
They want this. Yeah, they want the disorder of the Tower of Babel. But at one level, they need enough order, or a modicum of order and money, to continue living their double lives. Yeah. And so they want to keep raiding the treasury of the church. So they're not going to kill that. They're like parasites. They don't want to kill off the host completely, because that's what they depend on. So they're going to stop at a certain point, and they'll say, well, we're not going to let Monsignor Grinder be the number 3 guy at the USCCB. He's going to leave that, and they'll get that out, and then he'll end up at a parish. So they're like parasites. They know they can't swallow the entire host.
Right. But don't they still end up with, and this this troubles me. They will still end up with a bunch of stupid, ill-informed, uninformed, ignorant parishioners like the Protestants have that'll pay their 10%. And so they will still maintain their lifestyle and their position because there's so many Catholics who are so ignorant. As Bishop Callahan said, we bishops have failed to teach them right from wrong for the last 50 years. So 80% of Catholics don't know right from wrong. So you're going to get a majority of Catholics, or in name only, still supporting these bishops in name only.
Yeah, right.
And,
yeah,
and
well,
so I don't think
bad bishops beget bad lay Catholics, and bad lay Catholics are willing to continue to pay for their double lives.
Yes,
now,
yes. Or they all go to heaven, by the way.
This podcast is we're speaking to those people who want to reclaim the church for Jesus. We want to take it out of the hands of these defilers of the temple of the Lord.
Yes,
we want to give it to reclaim the church for Jesus and put it in the hands of bishops who are faithful to the will of Jesus Christ. That's what this is about. That's why this podcast exists. I don't want to waste time on academic analysis. I want this to be an instrument of concrete change for the good for Jesus's church. The church belongs to Jesus, period. It doesn't belong to Barry Knestout and his corrupt buddies. It doesn't belong to Wayne Ball. It doesn't belong to Wilton Gregory, who's also a complete disgrace, who was part of that complete sham after McCarrick, where it's all about the appearance of reform, but not the reality of reform.
Right.
And Gregory won't even ask questions about this.
Right, George, to your point, it's all about the appearance and not the reality of reform. Let's go back to the Dallas Charter. Who ran that? McCarrick.
Right.
McCarrick and Gregory.
Yeah. Like, is that not the fox watching the hen?
Exactly. And they exempted themselves from the rules, and they still exempt themselves from the rules.
Yes, exactly.
If I could, I would like to add one more thing to this discussion, particularly with the bishops. This is something I've noticed for a while. In the first place, and I really drove the point home when they closed the churches during the virus, which was just like, what? Are you kidding me? So when they did that, I went, all right, wait a minute. Listen, these guys thrive off adulation. Okay, they want to get up there. That's one of the reasons they turned the altar around. All right, it's just like, this is my show, and I'm up here. Right, everybody look at me. Right. And the point is, there's one more thing we haven't touched upon, and I'm just going to say this very briefly. What's the end game here? The end game is to become an NGO, a non-government organization, and the end game is to merge with the World Economic Forum at Davos. And the World Economic Forum, have you noticed very suspiciously, out of all of the sexual crimes done by clergy of the Catholic Church, why is it not all over the paper? How have they suddenly gotten a pass? I think that's a fair statement. And the reason they're getting a pass, and the reason why Francis is so beloved, is because the World Economic Forum needs them. They need them for credibility to give a tacit nod to God. They pretend to be like God. So we need those guys, and that'll keep the people in line so we can all start eating bugs. Got it?
They're borrowing a page from Saul Alinsky, who said in Rules for Radicals, we need to turn the Catholic Church into a propaganda machine for our left-wing causes. And they've been doing that for decades. And this program, what we're doing, this show Infiltrated, we are going to look at that all over the world. That's happening in Latin America, and it explains why Latin America is going from Catholic to increasingly Protestant. It's because liberation theology, the infiltration of the church by communists, is killing off the church in Latin America. Yeah. The same thing is, of course, happening in China, which is, the Chinese church is under the thumb of communists. And that's because we have a pope who is sympathetic to communists.
Right. And look, the Vatican II is a coming out party. It's been going on for a long time. These guys have been working on this for a long time. Now we got our guy in. Guess what? We've now become an NGO. Okay. Yeah. Now, all of a sudden, the guys in Latin America, after the liberation theology permanently destroys this continent, in Central and South America. Now everybody's on board, and very silently, as they're selling off church property and destroying the faith, and I'm not overstating this, as they're destroying the faith, what's really going on? Very, very silently, Jeffrey Sachs is at the World Economic Forum, he's at the Pontifical Academy. All of these guys are also, you wouldn't even, they're not, it's not even recognizable anymore. You see my point? Yeah. Don't even get me started on the Federal Reserve, but that's another point, Father Altman.
Jim, I think we've been going for almost an hour here, so let's wrap up. But we want we want to make some points at the end here, which is, please, if you're listening to this, call the Diocese of Richmond at 804-359-5661 and express your outrage at the misconduct of Barry Knestout, and tell them you're not going to give a penny to the Diocese of Richmond until he cleans up his act. Okay, the second thing is call the USCCB, and we've got that on the board here, 202-541-3000. Now these weasels are going to stop answering the phone, so it'll probably ring for a while, but sometimes they'll answer. And when they do, ask for the office of the president or the Committee on the Protection of Children. They'll patch you through to a voicemail. Leave a voicemail saying, I'm not going to give a penny to the church until Barry Nestout steps down from the Committee on the Protection of Children. Now, I think we'll probably just wrap up there. I'll thank Father Altman for kindly coming on and offering insight. We appreciate it.
What a privilege.
It's a great, we of course long for the day when you're no longer canceled and you're not only a priest but a bishop. I think that's a pretty long-term goal. But the point is that if all of us try to move the ball downfield for Jesus Christ by doing concrete things to take the church away from the Barry Nestouts, one day we will have bishops and priests who are faithful to the will of Christ. So thank you, Jim. Thank you, Father Altman. I think with that, Jim, we should bring this first debut podcast of Infiltrated with George Neumayr to a close. Thank you.